Welcome to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. We bring you news and analysis from the front lines of the global struggle for social and economic justice. I'm your host, Brian Griffith, and here's what's going down this week in your backyard and across the world. This week, we are joined by Lewis Conway, who's a community organizer with Grassroots Leadership, author of 2 books, and a candidate for Austin City Council District 1. We're going to be talking about his campaign. We're going to be talking about his life and so much more in the next half hour here on People's Republic. So, thank you, Lewis, for being on the show.
Thank you for having us.
If you can, basically just tell us a little bit about, what brought you to this point, what kind of inspired you to run, and, what you hope to get out of this.
Absolutely. So I think for us, it began at the end of last year's ledge session when we were able to defeat 76 Republicans from rescinding the Austin Fair Chance Hiring Ordinance. And once we were able to stop folks from rescinding that ordinance, people began to have conversations with me about running for office, which were kind of off-putting. Because I'm an organizer. And so initially I was like, I fight politicians. Politics was not part of my parole plan, as I like to say. So what I hope to accomplish is affordable housing, low-income housing as a human right, making sure that we take this $925 million bond, and we're being very responsible about the $250 million that we earmarked for affordable housing, and make sure the $100 million that we have earmarked for land acquisition, that we use that for a community land trust. We want to make sure that we bring district care, which is health care for all. This is our version of kind of latching on to the national campaign of Medicare for All. We believe that Texas is one of the most underinsured and uninsured states, and Austin is definitely plagued with folks not being able to afford health care. So our plan is based on a San Francisco plan that's been in effect for 10 years. It's going to give everybody health care regardless of your income, your housing, or immigration status. And of course, we want to bring some criminal justice reform as well.
Yeah, that's really such an important issue across the country. I know so many people, including myself, who have struggled with access to healthcare for various reasons. It seems like grassroots leadership has been really, has pushed and really won some real victories in the past year. You were saying the kind of work you were doing before with grassroots leadership was what kind of brought that up. How did you get involved, first of all, with grassroots leadership?
Grassroots Leadership recruited me after we did the Fair Chance Hiring Ordinance fight. I was part of Second Chance Democrats. I was the political director for Second Chance Democrats. And once we were able to pass that ordinance, Grassroots they are probably the first organization that I was aware of that made sure that folks who were directly impacted by the criminal justice system are the kind of folks that they were trying to recruit.
And when you're talking about criminal justice reform, what do you see as the steps necessary for that? What are all the things? I know that's a huge topic, but what are the things really that you need to be reformed at the moment?
Well, initially, I think it's really easy, right? We stop cash bail. We give alternatives for incarceration. Definitely with treatment. I think right now HRC has just created a new walk-in center, drop-in center that enables cops to not arrest folks, in case they're having a mental health episode or a drug syndrome episode. I think those are the 2 long-hanging fruits. I think at the state ledge, we need to pursue reclassification of these state jail felonies back down to misdemeanors. I think we need to pursue decarceration, not only at a policy level, but begin to look at decarceration as an economic model as well. As you know, our economy is built on law enforcement. We got local police, we got school police, we got state police, we got federal police, we got secret police, and we got the secret police that watch the secret police. Then we got judges and lawyers and courtrooms. So there's a whole modality based on law enforcement that we need to begin to rethink our economics. And capitalism is kind of driving that.
The two kind of issues we've hit on so far in the short time we've been talking are both the kind of healthcare issue and the issue of incarceration.
Absolutely.
And mass incarceration and the kind of police, I'd call it a police state that we live in many ways. And I think, people are beginning to see how these two things are related, where so much of, for instance, the kind of drive to incarcerate mass amounts of people is directly related to the fact that, so many people don't have, maybe close to homelessness. Homelessness obviously affects mental health. So
Absolutely.
we have all these kind of, we have all these kind of social problems building from these crises of capitalism, this lack of access to basic mental health services, to other health, to physical health services, to housing, and all this. That's then kind of the two approaches you can really go to try and solve these problems are either to really build up that public infrastructure, or you can just go with what seems to be the capitalist quote unquote solution right now, which is just to lock everybody up. And that seems to be in many ways more profitable for people. Very rarely do we see kind of cities, states or municipalities, or even at the federal level, very rarely do we see kind of budget decreases for the police or budget decreases for the military. All of these cuts are always having, all the cuts that we're told are necessary for the economy always have to come from, these kind of social services, the public services. So yeah, do you see those related in those ways as well?
Absolutely. I think capitalism has proven itself lacking in its ability to address people's basic needs. And I think if we look at capitalism, and particularly as we look at gentrification and we look at displacement of black folks, we see that it has been the pursuit of profit that has driven black folks into Hutto and into Manor because they can't afford their homes anymore. And as we have gone through this land assessment process, and land is assessed at a higher value, that means folks are paying higher taxes, and higher taxes are forced to pay. We don't pay our taxes every month. We pay our taxes at the end of the year. And so when grandmama was used to paying $6,000 a year, now she's paying $12,000 a year. She's not accustomed to paying that. Not only that, she doesn't know that she's become susceptible to foreclosure because she's crossed over into that $10,000 mark, right? So that's all a result of capitalism. It's all a result of us not looking at centralized services as a solution, as not looking at the whole picture as opposed to just pieces of it. In criminal justice, if we look at criminal justice in a silo, then we will have an economy as we have it now, where it's built on a law enforcement modality. We have to begin to look at criminal justice as kind of a paradigm. Right? And so what I mean by that is we have to pursue zero unemployment. We have to pursue job guarantees, not just on a federal level, but on a municipal level. And we have to seek to employ those folks who are fathers from being able to seek employment or gain employment. Because once folks are employed in our community, that does something to our economy that trying to policy our way out of it just won't do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know you consider yourself to be a democratic socialist.
Absolutely.
Can you tell me, I guess, what that means to you, what that entails to you, what the central kind of values are? Again,
democratic socialism, that those two words put together are something new, but socialism for black folks has been around since W.E.B. Du Bois. Right? And so we understood that as we look historically at the plight of black folks in America, socialism has, though it's had its issues, it has been one of the only parties that has addressed our issues. And so as I looked at the landscape, the political landscape in Austin, it's a very partisan town. And though this is a nonpartisan race, I realized that I was going to be up against an incumbent at that point who was very entrenched in democratic Democratic Party, and I wanted to coalesce the energy around healthcare and the energy around criminal justice. And I felt like, being a democratic socialist was the only thing that was going to align us with a significant portion of the population that was tired of being at the bottom, tired of having their rights trampled on, right? And so that has been our clarion call, if you will. We Not Me isn't just a slogan. It has been the foundation of what we have built our platform on.
I'd like to, talk about the case that in many ways has kind of put you in the news a lot, that I, have some concerns about the way it's been covered. Really, that your kind of former incarceration seems to be dominating the story when there's when really it should be so much more about your platform. But I also, it seems like you're also using that as a way to kind of bring about the issue of kind of the rights of formerly incarcerated people in kind of productive ways, and to use that to talk about kind of transformational justice. So,
right, it's not just the rights of former incarcerated people; it's the rights of people, right, including the victims, right. So I think when we look at transformational justice, it's a two-way street. It's folks being held accountable and folks holding a space for folks to hold them accountable. I believe, as someone who has done harm to my community, that it's my responsibility to not only apologize, but to hold a space. And I think sometimes we think apologizing is enough. But I realize that if I hadn't run for office, there would not be a space for folks to hold me accountable. I can't take that space for granted and just use it as a way to advance our platform politically.
Yeah.
Because I'm an organizer. And so as I came into it as an organizer, I realized that we have to not only count us being in office as a win, but also making sure that folks who are directly impacted by the criminal justice system, that we encounter some healing, that we advocate for healing. And so this campaign has been about advancing electoral politics locally in a way that hasn't been seen. But it's also about a way of us creating narratives around people not being the worst day of their lives for the rest of their lives, right? And also a way for people who have been harmed to maybe find a way out of that as well. I think one of the most encouraging things for me before I ran is that as I told my story, people who were victims of violent crime were able to come up to me and tell me that they hadn't been able to forgive that person up until that point, right? So I think it's been important for us not to be a Puritan milquetoast type of a candidate.
Yeah.
We've been very authentic. We've been very honest, and we think that we are a sum of all of our experiences, not just the good ones, right, or the bad ones. And I think that's what makes up diversity and leadership as we pursue what Austin looks like in 2050 and 2060. And as we prepare to hand off leadership to a younger generation, we have to make sure that we have pushed the envelope as far as we can to make sure folks have the best access to realize the best quality of life possible.
So when you use the term transformational justice, as opposed to, I hear the term restorative justice used a lot. What is transformational justice as opposed to restorative justice? What is the history of those?
So the backstory is, we can go all the way back to Africa in terms of restorative justice, where a member of the community may have harmed someone else in the community, and they gather in a circle, and that person is told, about the harm he's done and the kind of expectations people had of him and how much he has damaged that expectation, right? And so it's not so much a punitive process where they're looking to extrapolate that person from a community. It's more about figuring out a way to bring that person back into it and heal the harm that's been done. So, we take that now in our school to prison pipeline, right? We try to use restorative circles. And what that means is we put kids in these circles with other kids who have their backgrounds, with other kids who may not have their backgrounds, and they share experiences, right? But you can't speak if you're not holding a talking piece. And sometimes that's the only time some of these kids have a chance to speak. And so restorative means that we're going to look to restore harm that's being done. We're going to look to restore dignity that's been erased from people. And when we talk about transformational justice, for us who are helping implement restorative justice, there's a higher level of responsibility for us than to just restore. Right? Because sometimes you may be restoring something back to a state that was not good to begin with. Right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And so that's where the transformation comes in, is that, our campaign, electoral politics in Austin will never look the same. We have transformed it. Right? That means when you touch it, it doesn't look the same again, ever. The same with harm. When you have someone who's been harmed and someone has done the harming, if those people are able to get into a space together, and it's not about apologizing, it's about one party expressing what they haven't been able to express. The criminal justice system creates a wall, right? A legal wall where the victim can't be contacted by someone who's been convicted of the crime. So in my instance, for 20 years, I wasn't able to contact his mother because she was considered a victim. And while I was on parole, I can't contact them. And so running for office opened up a space to where she was able to hold me accountable for something that she hasn't been able to address in her life for over 20 years. So it's about just providing access to folks to healing.
Okay, so I think that really that tells me a lot, and that was something that I wasn't really aware of. Is kind of I've seen these terms thrown about quite a bit, but never really gotten a good explanation of those. And I think a lot of people would kind of benefit to hear that, because our prison system, our punishment system, our carceral system is set up to do all of the opposite things. It's entirely reactionary, both in kind of the political sense as well as reactionary in the sense of it is entirely a reaction. It's not based on trying to...
It's addressing issues and not the conditions that cause those issues, right? And we talk about thinking upstream. When as an organizer, we are front-end problem solvers, which means we solve it before it becomes a problem. So I don't look at, the kids' behavior in that classroom. I look at what might be going on at home, because his father's incarcerated and his mother has to work 3 extra jobs. Right. But as the school officer, the school truancy officer, or the school police officer, they're only identifying his behavior. They're not thinking about the cause of his behavior. And if we ever address the cause of behavior, we may not have a need for a school officer.
Yeah. And that's something I can testify to so much in Austin, is that, the Austin schools are, very much, especially the ones in working class communities and, black and brown, communities are so militarized. My kind of day job, is in education. So I'm at a lot of kind of different schools throughout the year. And there was a point, at one point, because we bring we teach podcasting, so I bring little podcasting kits into school, and I remember a kid either lost one of those or took it home with him or whatever, and when they found it, I don't really want to say the school, but the school, rather than just contacting me and being like, hey, we found your recorder, here it is, they asked me if I want to press charges against the kid. Middle school kid who had lost $100 recorder.
But they were prepared to destroy his life over $100, right? And so, and I think that's not, so it's not so much the militarization of the cops that concerns folks like me, it's the pervasiveness, right, of how law enforcement and the results of contact with law enforcement impacts your entire life. It impacts your access to healthcare. It impacts your access to employment. It impacts your access to housing, education, right? It all derives from some type of negative impact with the criminal justice system. But on the other side of that coin, what benefits are there from a positive impact with the criminal justice system? Is there such a thing, even for the victim, right? Is there a such thing as a positive outcome, right? So for 20 years, the victim's mother felt like, even though I had been sentenced, even though I served my time, according to her, it still was not enough, right? So what good is the criminal justice system doing if the victims aren't feeling like they are being served, right? So I think we just have to look at the system in a way that we are uncomfortable, which means it provides jobs. And when something is providing a job, we will make any excuse to make sure it stays around.
Talking about the things that providing jobs, of course, being the kind of the massive pervasiveness of law enforcement.
Absolutely. As I said, the state police, the cops, the private prisons. Even if we don't even go into the private prisons, I think sometimes we get, we chase that rabbit down that hole like private prisons are the only bad prisons. They all suck. Yeah. All of them should close, right? Because we argue with tuition-free education, but we make plenty of room in the budget for public safety, right? Not community safety, right? And this public safety, we spend 80% of that budget on making sure that law enforcement is paid, not our fire department, not our EMS. If we paid our fire departments, I'll take that back. If we paid our teachers, the way we paid our law enforcement, I would argue that we would reduce the need for law enforcement, but that would require some front-end thinking and action taking. Yeah, that would absolutely require just kind of a whole different approach to the way things are. Because one of my large criticisms of so much of what's kind of emerged in since Black Lives Matter is that a lot of people have suggested what they call "quote unquote" community policing. That is a horrible term, and I want folks to stop using that term. Anything that ends with policing, stop it, right? So let's talk about safety. Let's talk about community safety. Let's talk about neighborhood safety. Let's talk about gender safety. Let's talk about folks being safe to be themselves. Let's talk about folks being safe to express themselves, right? None of that has to do with policing. And I think, some groups are well-intentioned. I think, buying into this term of community policing, we are only creating another layer of law enforcement, right? This one is more readily accessible to folks within the neighborhoods because we think that these people are on our side because they use the word community policing. Anytime the police presence has increased in our neighborhoods, we see that there's a rash of folks dying. We see that there's a rash of arrests of black folks. And we see that incarceration rates they begin to skyrocket as we employ this broken window style of policing or this better quality of life policing, I think is what they call it now. Community policing is the bane of the black community, and we should eschew it at every instance we can. So we're not anti-law enforcement. We're not anti, folks. It's not like we want this anarchistic society where, there are no rules and no, it's not that at all. We want people to be safe. And we know that young black men die as a result of folks dialing 911. Yeah. And if we look at it, folks now are resulting to 911 because they have a problem with your coupon. Right. And, if I don't have the right kind of coupon, they'll call the cops on me. If they don't want to serve me at Starbucks, they'll call the cops on me. Right. So the cops have become kind of a catch-all, a societal catch-all when we don't want to deal with black people. Right.
Yeah, and in a way, that's kind of what they've always been set up to do. I think people...
Yeah, but that was before the internet and before we had instant access, right, to 911. And you're right. They were initially created, as the black codes, right? And as we talk about convict leasing, as we talk about the ending of slavery, and as we talk about black men being painted in a way that made white people afraid, that they needed something to corral and contain these black savages, right? So that whole identity of black folks being a danger has persevered up until now.
Yeah, and the sort of the kind of class background of police is always such that they kind of came into existence because I think in so many ways because the two roots of police where you can either trace most police departments either back to kind of union busters.
The Emancipation Proclamation brought the cops.
Yeah.
Right. Freeing black folks created cops. Mm-hmm. You understand?
Yeah.
Like America had no need for cops until black folks were free because they had to do something to, enforce that 13th Amendment, right? That we can keep you a slave as long as you are convicted of a felony, right? So it's that kind of that dual thing, right? That American thing where we give and we take at the same time, right? And so we give you freedom, but we make sure that we create laws and conditions that will rob you of that freedom.
Yeah, and so kind of coming back around to what needs to be done and what a real alternative to our draconian police and incarceration system in our last few minutes. Can you kind of tell people again sort of what your campaign is about, what kind of difference you hope to make, and how this is different than sort of your in many ways, because this is a different kind of campaign than what we've seen out of Austin.
Absolutely. Amen. We are a people-based campaign. We are, from the outset, we have built a campaign that was rooted in listening to the experts, and we believe that people are experts in their own conditions. And so when we sought to build a platform, we held a people's assembly, and we made ourselves available. And folks talked about property taxes. Folks talked about health care. Folks talked about not being able to afford to live in Austin, although they worked in Austin. Folks talked about cash bail, their loved ones being stuck out there at Del Valley because they can't afford bond. So for us, it's about implementing policies that directly impact the people. Not just folks who have been in jail and folks who are locked up, but folks who have lost their home to property taxes, folks who are having to choose between a car note or taking their kid to the doctor. All right. And when we think about who has the experience to protect paid sick at the ledge, then we have to look to folks who have fought hard at the state ledge, who have fought hard at the ordinance, fought hard for the ordinance. So we want to bring experience. We want to bring a voice that is for, of, and by the people. And we want to really pursue participatory democracy in a way that local politics has not seen it.
For those of you who might be tuning in, we are talking with Lewis Conway, who is a community organizer with Grassroots Leadership, the author of 2 books, as well as one of the candidates for Austin City Council District 1. Where can people find more information about you and your campaign?
Well, if people are just so happen to be on the internet, they could possibly go to Conway4ATX.com. That's FOR or the number 4, whichever one. Conway4ATX.com.
Cool. This has been Brian Griffith with another, with People's Republic here on, we are broadcasting on KOOP, and we also broadcast out of WHIV in New Orleans. Thank you, Lewis, for coming on.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate you.
On August 25th, the Sex Workers Outreach Project held a benefit at the Museum of Human Achievement for emergency relief and bailout funds. This is the latest in many national campaigns by various organizations to provide aid to sex workers after the passage of the SESTA-FOSTA Act. This is this is what it's called, the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act and the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act. So what is the SESTA-FOSTA Act? And what impact has it really had on sex workers? Joining us now to talk about SESTA-FOSTA as well as the Sex Workers Outreach Project is Rainny Daze, who's a representative with SWOP. Thank you, Rainny, for being on the show.
Thank you, Brian, for having me on the show.
It's a pleasure to have you on. Can you tell me a little bit first about SWOP, the organization you're with, how they got started, and what the kind of aims are?
Okay, so SWOP, as you said, is the Sex Workers Outreach Project, and we kind of formed from an online group of just sex workers past and present, kind of helping each other out, and just, whoever knew sort of it was based with sex workers in Austin and then surrounding areas and some and even some other states. And if you were traveling or if you were doing work in your town, there would always be a person who, kind of knew the game and kind of would help you out with whatever you needed. And then they would also provide support, emotional comfort. There would be kind of safe, people providing safe housing or whatever other sex workers needed. We had each other's back. And when the whole thing with SESTA-FOSTA went down, we decided to open up a Austin chapter of SWOP. SWOP is actually a national organization, and there was already a chapter in Austin, but it was inactive for some time, so we just kind of revitalized it and started having monthly meetings and planning fundraisers and kind of just getting the SW community of Austin and its surrounding suburbs together. And, it's nice, because before it was all online, and it's nice to see your fellow, for lack of a better word, coworkers in person, and knowing someone's always got your back.
Yeah, it seems like there would be a real need to kind of build that community and build that support, given the kind of marginalized nature of sex work. It seems like that that would be an absolute priority for sex work communities in a way even beyond the need for kind of all workers to organize, of course, to unionize, to support each other, economically, financially, and emotionally. So yeah, what then have the kind of biggest needs been of the community, and how has SWOP been able to meet that?
The biggest need in the community has been we've been doing these benefits for emergency funds, because after SESTA-FOSTA and after the shutdowns of the Craigslist personals and the Backpage, there have been some SW out of work or barely getting by, and we're here to through these benefits we've been able to provide rent and money for ads, and just kind of we have also a helpline for if someone's having a bad date, or just someone wanting to reach out. We've been kind of like mobilizing, and we have money for bailout funds also. So, for someone who'll, bailout funds for going to jail.
Yeah, so I imagine there's been some serious kind of repression by the state, kind of associated with this. Is this kind of a regular thing, or?
Not in the terms of the bailout fund, but in the terms of people needing us as far as emergency funds, because the more marginalized of our community have been, pushed further underneath without kind of a way to get work or get, safe work. So we really, we've mostly been trying to help out our community with the emergency funds for that.
Okay. So I think, that also kind of brings up, the actual issue here with SESTA-FOSTA. I think most people were either not even aware of this having been passed, or a good portion of the population didn't even register to a lot of people. It was not given the coverage it should have gotten, and it wasn't given as much critical coverage as I feel that it should have gotten. And I'm not going to claim to actually know that much about it. I've read some criticisms of it, but I think generally we can start from the basic principle, from the basic assumption that nobody in Congress has ever, or probably will ever, have the best in the kind of safety of the sex work communities as their kind of priority. The truth is, I guess the easiest way to put that is nobody in Congress actually cares about the safety of sex workers or the sex work community. So what exactly is SESTA-FOSTA?
I'm glad you asked. I actually stood in front of like a bunch of people at Queer Bomb this past June. And kind of rattled off a speech about the impact of this bill. So, as you know, it's supposed to fight online trafficking, which it has actually pushed actual victims of trafficking farther underground. And, like, the effects of it have been Backpage shutting down, Craigslist personals being taken away, the most easily accessible online advertising for those of us, those SW that are not as privileged. It's so SESTA-FOSTA is basically making it harder for folks to get to have access to online advertising and safe ways to screen clients because of the act. Discussion boards online for, hey, I've had a bad time with such and such, here's his email, they've been disabled. So it's really a big deal. Pimps have been preying on SW too, like independent SW who are maybe like desperate for work. I have had a number of friends who have been reached out to by pimps and people who were able to safely sustain their lifestyle by doing things through online venues have been forced to go back to the streets and go back to kind of real life like situations that may not be as safe for them. And then disabled sex workers have been, there's this whole like subgroup within this marginalized like people like disabled trans women of color especially, and just people who don't really have the privilege or like who don't really feel comfortable in real life situations have been pushed to pursue that in order to make rent or in order to be, you know, in order to survive, basically. I've heard of cases where people have gone out to work on the streets and are missing, or, you know, have turned up dead somewhere. And people don't seem to care. Like, when SESTA-FOSTA first came around, there was no one talking about it on online platforms. The only other people that were talking about it were fellow sex workers. Like, no one cared. Like, well, that's not true, but a lot of people didn't really, like you said, a lot of people didn't really know about it, but then a lot of people just didn't seem to care. It was like we were talking to ourselves, basically. And, but yeah, so, to sum it all up, I can safely say that this bill has killed a lot of sex workers. Just, you know, with taking safe ways to get clients and, you know, it's just a heavy topic for me, and it's one close to my heart, you know, obviously.
Yeah. And yeah, it does seem like it's it took something that had some sort of a, you know, level of safety within the community, and it pushed it even farther underground. I feel like we're seeing that, in kind of all aspects of life. We're already kind of stigmatized lines of work, or marginalized people within their marginalization had tried to build a community, and now we're in the past you know, several years, I mean, really past several decades, but, you know, a lot of the problems we're seeing with capitalism, with its attacks on various populations, have happened over several decades at this point. But it you know, it's driven so much of this underground, and it's really made sex work so much more dangerous. And again, of course, it bears pointing out that the no one in Congress is actually concerned the least bit about the safety of any marginalized population. We've seen that over and over again. It's just it's a shame to me, but it's also not surprising that so many so-called self-described progressives both in Congress and just generally in society kind of signed on to that, or at least did not speak out against it. It's unfortunate, but it's not surprising. So we see the kind of Bernie Sanders types and whatnot just signing on, saying nothing about it, not speaking out.
Yeah.
can you tell me, remind our listeners once again kind of what SWOP is about, and let's then talk about the benefit that your organization just had on August 25th.
Okay. Well, SWOP is essentially an organization built up from a online group of sex workers who felt like we felt like we had an online community, and then we had the idea to try and make our online community IRL. And like I said, there was an Austin chapter of SWOP already established, but it was inactive, so we just kind of like picked up, the title, and just kind of started from there. It's really it's for sex workers, past, present, and then allies of SW. So it's just really an organization that seeks to help with relief for sex workers in the Austin area and the surrounding suburbs of Austin. So.
And then, so your last event on August 25th, from everything I've heard, went really well. Can you tell me a little bit about how that went down?
Definitely. It was a SWOP swim, and it was at the Museum of Human Achievement, which is just like a whole mess of fun. We had so what went down is that we had DJs who were spinning some track all night. We had pools. We had I think it was a few kiddie pools full of water beads. We had one big pool full of just regular water. Well, regular water. We had the Museum of Human Achievement has like this. It's that trailer, but it's like a modern trailer. It's like space air thing. But it was called The Mall, and it is kind of like a little mobile shop full of queer and feminist art. And we had a bar, we had a food truck that was kind of making such delicious like vegan food. Oh my God. They had these vegan chicken nuggets that were Sundays. We had the Museum of Human Achievement had a tattoo artist in residence that was doing tattoos for cheap. And they were just kind of like SWOP inspired tattoos. Like, oh, I actually got one if you want to see it.
Sure. We'll see how well this translates to the radio. Oh, okay. Yeah, so that's
stiletto. It's a pleaser. It's a heel that strippers commonly wear.
Oh, okay.
But and it was just a grand old time. We had a bake sale, we had a merch table, we have a lot of merchandise. I'm actually wearing a SWOP ATX tank top. Our merchandise is really just like all types of clothing with our logo on it. And we had a really good turnout. Like, it blew up. We all have lots of friends that came and they told their friends, and, so on and so on. So everyone came out. It was so hot that day.
Yeah, though I'm looking at it. I have to say, like, I looked at it. I really want to go. I'm sad I missed it. Just looking at the DJs, looking at the other stuff that was going on. But like it was good when, like, I'm just like, tell me about the event, and then sort of it went from, oh yeah, we had all this stuff there, and here's a tattoo I got, like that ramps it up to a whole new scale. Like that's just fun. Like that's a fun story to be able to tell. So yeah, that was, and of course that was for the, essentially a benefit for SWOP, the Sex Workers Outreach Project. I also think that SWOP is doing some important work in destigmatizing sex work, in really important ways. I think people need to be talking about more. So maybe we can, if you want to.
Yeah, definitely. For us, destigmatizing sex work is important because sex work, people do sex work for a lot of reasons. Like, people just seem to think that sex workers are pushed into sex work, or that sex work is the lowest form of work and that no one wants to do it. I have several friends in sex work that love their job and would not be doing anything differently. Like, it's important for people to know that there is a need for sex workers. Like, we're not just, we're not just some person in the back alley. We're your neighbors, we're your friends, we're your sisters, we're even your mothers at some point. So, like, it's important because when sex work is frowned upon by society, it's easy for people to label sex workers as less than and forget that we're people too, trying to make a living, be financially independent. And it's easy to pull stuff like this bill, and just, easy to to just let us die off. But I think it's important to establish sex work as as important as any other type of work. Like, if you do sex work, you're not less than the CEO of some Fortune 500, whatever that phrase is. It's just, I think it's just really important for the world, especially the United States, because let me remind you all there that Europe has a Declaration of Rights for sex workers specifically. So it's not America, get your head on straight. I don't know what you're doing, sweetheart, but it ain't right.
Yeah, and ultimately, I would even say that anyone doing sex work or anyone doing any sort of work is probably in my book many magnitudes more useful or to society than any CEO, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, definitely.
Because this may be kind of a kind of weird thing to say, but I think ultimately, in some way or another, everyone who works, everyone who does some sort of labor, what is it that we're selling when we do labor, whether it's coal mining, whether it's sex work, whether it's anything, we are selling the use of our bodies for money to sustain us in some way or another. Obviously, with sex work, there's because of the level of stigmatization, there's much more kind of marginalization, much more risk that goes with that does not have to go with that we can and should be trying to put an end to that stigmatization and that marginalization that goes along with sex work, for the dignity of all workers, for the dignity of all people.
I was actually talking about this thing with, it's like an over kind of like a cloud on my thought process of lately people like to tell sex workers that you could be doing something better, or you're selling your body. And literally Joe Blow over there at working retail is doing the same thing, selling your body for profit, but in in retail and stuff like that, it's usually for other people's profit. And sex work, it's just for your own profit. I just want to put that out there, because I don't know, because people don't seem to know what sex work really is. I talked to my mom about sex work, and I'm like, hey Mom, do you know what, I was talking about my involvement in SWOP, and I brought up sex worker, and she was just like, oh, sex worker, you mean prostitute? And I'm just like, okay, that's much more than it's much more than that, but and nothing on prostitutes. I love all sex workers, let me get that straight. Everybody in sex work is welcome in SWOP. We're not hierarchical. We have a website. It's SWOPATX.com. That's SWOPATX.com. And then to get in touch with us, to volunteer, or to inquire about our meetings, or any of our any of the things we're doing, we have an email account. It's contact swopatx@gmail.com. The helpline is 512-537-7573.
And this is what kind of helpline?
It's just kind of it's a helpline for sex workers who are struggling, or kind of need to reach out to,
okay. Yeah, and
the organization. So our helpline number is 512-537-7573, and our email address is contact@swopatx@gmail.com, and our website is swopatx.com.
Yeah, we've been talking on this episode of People's Republic with Rainny Daze, a representative with SWOP. That's a sex workers outreach project. That's a national organization. Rainny is one of the organized with the Austin chapter. But of course, if you're listening in New Orleans or wherever it is, you can find the sex workers outreach project across the country. I see that there is a New Orleans chapter as well, so you can probably probably reach out to them there. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun.
Awesome. That's all we have for this week. You have been listening to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. You can find our show on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher by typing in People's Republic. Or you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at People's Radio ATX for more news and analysis. Thank you for listening as we report on the global struggle for social and economic justice. We are out of here.